It's time now for business. We say hello to Kate Moody.
Hi, Francois.
The moral of the day, don't mess with Marseille.
Don't mess with Marseille. Don't mess with restaurant owners in France at the moment during the pandemic, because we've heard from an appeals court in southern France issuing what could really be a landmark ruling in how the insurance industry deals with the pandemic. The insurance company Axa has been ordered to pay a restaurant owner in Marseille all of the earnings that he lost during the pandemic. It's now the second court to rule in favor of the restaurant. This case could still head to France's top court. Thousands of restaurants, cafes, and other businesses have sought damages from their insurance companies since the country first went into lockdown nearly a year ago. Judges have issued varying rulings, but this is the first at an appeals level. AXA had argued that it was exempt from covering losses during a pandemic because of a clause that stated it wasn't applicable when at least one other establishment is subject to closure by the same region or department for the same reason. AXA says around 15,000 French businesses have similar contracts. If the case sets a precedent, it could really open the door to major payouts by a number of insurance companies. Well, EU leaders have been holding talks on the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines, travel restrictions, and the possibility of introducing a vaccine passport. They're hoping to better coordinate their approach to the pandemic and to set the stage for an economic recovery. The UK is not involved in the talks, and it has outlined its own plan to ease lockdown measures and potentially allow international travel from mid-May. It's led to a boom in holiday bookings this week, with European destinations still very much in demand. Luke Trago reports.
Spain's beaches have long been a draw for British tourists, and with the UK government announcing a roadmap out of lockdown this week after months of travel restrictions, the allure is still very much there.
Si tomamos las reservas de la semana pasada, mismo día, hemos aumentado un 565% más en reservas. Así que y son reservas de británicos.
Travel firms and airlines from Thomas Cook to TUI all reported an explosion in bookings, with top destinations including Spain, Greece, Portugal and Turkey. However, there's still uncertainty over whether or not the UK will be able to meet its May 17th deadline for permitting international travel, particularly with newer coronavirus variants sparking concern in Europe. And for now, little having been done to standardise an approach to restarting mass travel.
You won't just be worrying about whether you can get back into this country, you'll be worrying about whether you can go to the country that you want to go and visit. And if you have to have different sets of checks and tests for coming back into the UK than going to that country, it's just going to make it very complicated and difficult to get your head around, particularly if it keeps on changing.
There's been talk of vaccine passports, like the one Israel's issued for domestic use, though a common approach will likely be needed on an international level, with an extra layer of complication added through the UK's departure from the EU. Even as travel firms and airlines hope to salvage something of this year after a 2020 loss to COVID, it seems like sun-seeking Brits they'll have to wait for final approval at the state level first.
The number of Americans seeking unemployment benefits dropped unexpectedly last week. The Labor Department reported 730,000 new applications across the country. That's 110,000 fewer than the previous week and the lowest level since early November. Severe winter storms across much of the U.S. may have somewhat distorted the data, and economists say the labor market is still facing significant challenges. Overall, some 19 million Americans are still claiming some form of unemployment benefits. That includes the emergency pandemic aid programs. Some of those benefits are due to expire in mid-March, and Congress has yet to take up the Biden administration's $1.9 trillion stimulus plan. Let's check in on the day's trading action now. The major European indices closed in the red. The DAX down 0.7%, the CAC 40 about a quarter of a percentage point here in Paris. Shares of the French aviation giant Safran fell nearly 4% after it reported a small profit for 2020. It has, though, predicted a gradual recovery for the sector in the year to come. Wall Street is trending sharply lower. The tech-heavy Nasdaq down over 2%. Google and Facebook are both seeing their shares down around 2%. Twitter shares are bucking that trend. They've risen around 6%. The Dow Jones also off from its new record high. GameStop, meanwhile, is back in the spotlight. Shares of that video game retailer surging over 60% today. It's not clear what exactly sparked this sudden rally, although its chief financial officer did announce he was leaving the company on Tuesday. U.S. President Joe Biden is asking Congress to approve $37 billion in funding to tackle the shortage of microchips. He made the announcement as part of a review of how the U.S. is supplied with 4 key products. Biden wants to avoid a repeat of shortages that were experienced during the pandemic, as Kemi Nedlek explains.
Build more in America to avoid being caught out by shortages. Joe Biden's executive order aims to reduce imports of key goods and avoid a repeat of the supply issues the country saw in 2020. Americans, he says, should never face shortages of goods they rely on.
This is about making sure the United States can meet every challenge we face in this new era. Pandemics, but also in defense, cybersecurity, climate change, and so much more.
The president has ordered a government study on how the US is supplied with semiconductor microchips, medicines, electric vehicle batteries, and rare earth minerals. This as US automakers struggle with a shortage of the chips, forcing General Motors and Ford to curb production. The problem is set to cost them at least $1 billion in lost earnings. Biden now wants Congress to approve some $37 billion to fund the manufacture of semiconductors in the United States. A push to manufacture more in America has rare bipartisan support.
Really, this has to do with our ability to maintain our ability to defend ourselves and to compete with China. They're a serial stealer of our intellectual property, and we have to defend ourselves and we have to compete. That's what this is all about.
Rerouting the country's supply chains will be expensive and difficult. For goods that can't be produced at home, the White House wants to work with partner countries that they say share American values.
Sounds a little bit familiar to some of the things that we heard from the previous administration, although Biden, of course, says this is a very different matter.
All right. Well, I mean, he promised on the campaign trail that when he would be on message when it came to this issue. Kate Moody, many thanks. We'll have more business news for you later.